What up guys, Blue Spooky here. As always, just wanted to let you know that some of the stories in tonight's video may be stories I've read before. I tried my best to get new ones from the stories I have access to, which is all the tabs I currently have open, but there seems to be an area outage where I am of the internet, so I'm not really able to open any new stories or anything like that at the moment. Hopefully that will get resolved by tomorrow, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the stories anyway, and I hope you have a good evening. Thanks for understanding. Anyway, on to the stories now. This story is a different kind of scary, but it is still pretty spooky. This happened back when I was in college, when on a complete whim I hopped on the bus and went down to Daytona Beach for spring break. Well, it wasn't a complete whim, I guess. My friend Joey already happened to be down there, and he'd really been bugging me to come down and join him. Joey really didn't work or go to school, but his parents did have a lot of money. Rather than going down to Daytona for spring break for a week, he was there throughout the entire season. He eventually did convince me to come down, when he promised he would bring me back after the week was over. I only had enough money to make the trip one way, if I was going to spend any money there at all. One thing that Joey had left out about our spring break trip is that he had driven his father's motorcycle to get down there. If I wanted to ride back home, it would have to be on the back of his bike. I was not completely comfortable with that arrangement. I did eventually accept it though, because if I spent the rest of my money for a ticket home, I wouldn't be able to have any money for spring break itself. I had a good 5 days or so down there. Then, in order to get back to school on time, Joey would have to take me back home. It would be a 2-day drive, and we would have to get a hotel after the first night. Thankfully, he had his parents' magic credit card and would be paying for everything. We got started relatively early in the day. We went up through Florida and eventually made it into Georgia at around 1 p.m. This is when things started to get a bit ominous. It began to get dark very fast, as the most foreboding storm clouds I had ever seen in my life began to roll in. These weren't just black clouds. These were green clouds, which blocked out the entire sky. It was springtime in Georgia, and by 4 p.m., it was pitch black outside. The only positive was that it hadn't started pouring yet. We wanted to try and make it as far as we could before having to get the hotel room. I had never seen such a sight in my entire life. I really don't think I can do it justice just by describing it. The clouds looked like they were being driven with purpose down on us. I got truly afraid when they started spinning around like funnels right above our heads. I didn't really know if this was indicative of a tornado forming or what, but I could imagine it wasn't a positive thing regardless. Eventually, it began to storm and rain hard. If you've never ridden a motorcycle through a thunderstorm, I can't begin to tell you how scary that is. Each drop of rain slapped us on our faces. My body felt like needles was stabbing into my skin. It hurt real bad. I was worried that the force of the wind and rain would blow our motorcycle off the damn road, but Joey didn't appear to be ready to stop anytime soon. I didn't want to appear like a wuss either, but trust me, I was really scared. We saw a sign for a Holiday Inn at the next exit. It was then that Joey yelled back and asked me if I wanted to take that exit and stop there. I was in severe pain from the storm, and I was cold as well. I was frightened, but I thought about the kind of person Joey was. He was very adventurous, as if you hadn't already figured that out, and for some odd reason, I thought he would have more respect for me if I told him to hold out a bit longer. I yelled back to him, "No, let's see how far we can go before we have to stop." Joey laughed and we continued on. I think we went for another hour or so before Joey decided we were going to have to stop right now. It was just too fierce out there. We found an exit with what I believe was a hotel called Quality Inn or something. We checked in and I decided I needed to take a shower first. Joey was fine with that. because he wanted to watch the weather anyways. Joey flipped on the television, and of course there was a weather report on right away. I'll never forget in my entire life what it said. The town just off the exit that Joey had asked me if we wanted to stop at was hit just a half hour earlier by that tornado. One of the buildings shown on the news as being completely destroyed, the Holiday Inn we were both going to stay at. We were shocked. If we had taken that exit just an hour ago and checked into that hotel, we would not be here right now. We would have been there right when that tornado destroyed it. It was really weird because I wanted so badly to get out of that storm, but for whatever reason, something told me it was not right to exit at that moment. I live in a small town with my family. I was 19 when this happened. My brother was 13 years old. This happened when he was on spring break from school. My parents had already gone to work, and I had a job too, but I didn't have to go in until later in the day. There was going to be a period of about 4 hours or so after I went to work that my brother would be home alone in the house. That wasn't too big a deal to us though. He was already 13 years old. On this day, I had about an hour before it was time for me to leave for work. It was around 11 a.m., I believe. When I woke up, it was raining and storming very hard. It was pretty fierce out there. The wind was strong and blowing the trees back and forth. The sky was completely black with clouds. It looked more like the sun had recently set rather than recently having risen. The rain was pounding our house too. I was the type who didn't like to get up really long before going to work. I had to be there at 12:30, so I woke up at 11, made myself some coffee, and went into the living room to relax for a while. I was watching a bit of TV, and halfway watching the storm as well, when something outside caught my eye. I looked over, only to see a man out in the middle of the storm, walking down the street. He was tall and dressed in all black. But the weirdest thing was, he didn't seem to have an umbrella or even a raincoat. It was quite strange. I figured maybe he had just been out and about and gotten caught in the storm, but he didn't seem to be in any hurry either. As he walked down the street, he watched our house with a strange look on his face. Then he turned the block. I got a feeling something was wrong here, but I tried not to let it bother me too much. As I was watching the television more, about 10 minutes later, it caught my eye once again. I looked out the window and was quite surprised to see the man wandering around the block once more. Just like the last time, he kept glancing at our house, pivoting his head as he walked along. This time, I was much more concerned than I had been before. Before, the man was just a strange weirdo walking around in the rain. Now he was a strange weirdo walking around in the rain who seemed to have something on his mind, and it seemed to have something to do with my home. At first, I could have dismissed this all as him just having been caught out in the storm, but walking around the block multiple times indicated he was in no hurry to get anywhere. Just a strange man walking in the rain. I had finished my coffee and I had to get to work soon, but I decided I needed to wait and see if the man would circle our house yet again. I was really hoping it wasn't something other than just a weirdo who liked the rain. Maybe he really wasn't singling out our home. Perhaps he was casing every house on the block for an empty one. This was the third time he walked around, once again looking at our home specifically. I got really concerned now. It was exactly like before, too. I really wasn't sure what to do in this instance. I didn't think the guy had done anything wrong or illegal, so I couldn't call the police on him, but I didn't feel safe leaving my 13-year-old brother home alone. It was a slim chance, but there was a chance this man was going to try to break in when I left or something. I couldn't take my brother to work with me, so I had to find some other way. When I left, all the cars would be gone from the driveway. That may be exactly what this guy was looking for. After going over it in my head again and again, I decided I was being paranoid enough that I should see if I could drop my brother off at a friend's house. I explained to him that I was worried because something weird was going on here. I asked him if he had anybody who would let him stay until my parents got off work. Thankfully, he did. He called up his friend Dylan, and I dropped him off over there and headed to work myself. I double-checked and made sure everything was locked up tight before I left, too. I was working, and the rain was still coming down violently for hours. We were not very busy because of it. Around 6 p.m., though, I got a call from my mother. Someone truly had broken into our house. I wasn't really surprised, although I did feel like an idiot for not having called the police before. What bothered me the most, though, was not that the house had indeed been broken into. What bothered me is that they didn't steal a single thing, or even touch anything. That told me that the man who broke in wasn't trying to steal our things. When I explained what happened to my parents, they were very happy I hadn't left my little brother in the house alone, because who knows what would have happened to him. This was a story I grew up hearing my mom telling me. I was really young when this happened, and I know for a fact it must have been before I was 5 years old. I have some foggy memories of something happening, especially because my mom at the time didn't want me to freak out. Some context. First, we have a family all over the country. I remember spending so much of my childhood just on road trips from state to state to visit different family members. We knew our ins and outs on traveling. 2, when I was a child, I would randomly hug strangers a lot and tell them I loved them. I was so filled with joy and love it just spilled over onto other people. There was basically only one stranger I never immediately latched onto the second I saw them, and this is that story. My mom was taking me to visit some relatives, while my dad was staying at home to watch my brothers. She had to go house sit and, in general, was a better caretaker of me than my father was. It only made sense that I go with her. We were driving for hours until we finally hit a rest stop and got out to use the restroom. As we did so, we noticed immediately this guy meandering around the parking lot. According to my mom, it looked like he was closely watching everyone who was entering and leaving. The second we got out of the car, he began to observe us too. My mom held my hand tight as we headed to the restroom, but immediately picked up on the fact that I let go of her hand to hold on to her other hand, the side of her away from the man. Looking back, she told me it was clear somewhere in my tiny child brain I must have picked up on some sign of danger or something. I seemed to be avoiding the man as much as I could, and would quicken my pace to the restroom and car as well. I never did that with any other stranger. I never blatantly avoided another adult like that. Anyway, we do our business and head back to the car. The man had gotten back to his car as well, and was now watching us get ready to leave. Only, as we did so, he began to follow us in his own car. My mom immediately realized what was going on and tried to shake him off on the highway. He just wouldn't budge though, and tried to get as close to our car as he could. Apparently, while doing this, a semi-truck driver also on the road noticed how frantic and off she was driving and could see her looking back at his car. He realized what was going on and drove up to her side, kinda made eye contact with her. They were on the same page from then on. Turns out the driver had called up on his radio to other truckers in the area and told them what was going on. A bunch of drivers from different routes came onto the same highway we were traveling on. A few minutes later, they began to block the man's car off, essentially completely trapping him away from my mother and I. She turned onto an exit to get off the highway to another rest stop as the original truck driver followed us. The man still boxed in by the other trucks. He got out and talked to my mom and told her he'd picked up on what was happening. He asked us if we were okay and drove with us to a Burger King. He even got us something to eat. We talked quite a lot, and he followed us back onto the road until eventually we went our separate routes. My friends and I enjoy hiking mountain bike trails in the woods on a mountain nearby our houses. One day they couldn't go outside though, so I brought my younger sister with me instead. I was also going to bring my little brother, but he was going to be a little bit late, since today he was staying at a friend's house. This day was a little bit rainy and was also quite cold. Nobody would be out hiking the trails today. They had never seen what my friends and I had been working on the past couple of months either, so that was the day to show them. Basically, you walk straight down a trail. When it turns 90 degrees, you go to the right just off it, then around a bend. There's an overgrown, abandoned forest road at this area. At the end of this forest road, we had made a small trail that led to the bottom of our MTB trail. My sister and I waited for my little brother to arrive, but then my mom called me, telling me my brother didn't know where to go. I told my sister to go all the way back to wait for him outside the trail in our neighborhood. She never saw him though. He decided since he didn't know where to go despite the clear instructions that he was just going to go back home, which my mom called to inform me. I called my sister to tell her to come back up the trail to meet up with me, telling her very clearly to make sure nobody was following her. This wasn't for our safety, but so nobody would discover these trails me and my friends were building. We wanted it to stay a secret. Something about this time was a bit different though. As my sister began to walk back down the trail, I could see through the forest all the way across the road to where she was on her way up. Then I thought to myself, wait, was she wearing a white jacket before? I realized as this figure got more towards the clearing that this was not my little sister. This was a fully grown man. Nobody should have known about this trail, and even if they did, they would have no reason to come up here. Plus, the rain the past couple of days had made most of the trail muddy, extremely muddy. I started running down the trail, then hid behind a tree so I could call my sister and tell her not to come back. All of a sudden, I heard someone call out to me. "What are you doing?" It was my little sister. She had already made it all the way back up to where I was. I knew what was happening now. This man was following my sister specifically. I was terrified. I could tell my sister was starting to pick up something serious was going on as well. I grabbed her and hid her behind a tree with me. We waited for around 10 minutes, but I didn't see the person anywhere. There was no way to go but up the trail towards us, so unless this person was hiding in the trees off the forest road, they must have turned back. We started to make our way back, as quickly and quietly as possible. I started to get the sense, though, that I was being watched. We made it to our bikes, which were thankfully still there. It seemed the man hadn't tried to steal them. I told my sister to grab her bike, so we could walk through the rest of the trail without the noise of our hub clicking. This way, we could hear everything going on around us. As we got towards the entrance of where the forest was, it was much easier to see the footprints. There was one set of large boot prints, deep on top of my sister's smaller footprints, meaning they were more recent. I confirmed I was 100% not going insane. Once we got out of the forest, we started riding our bikes to the neighborhood, and I made sure to stay back to see we weren't being followed. We made it back home just fine in the end. We told our parents, who were just glad I was out there as well. All I could think about was what if my sister had been alone, or if the man had caught her while he was following her on the trail. What would have happened to her in the end? I don't like to think about it. My name is Leia. I live in the north of France in one of the houses in a family neighborhood. I was 15 years old when this story happened. My parents were separating. My mother was a nurse, so I was often left at home alone. It was November of 2021, I believe. It would get much darker much earlier around that time, so that meant I was home alone in absolute darkness. Around 7 p.m., I heard some knocking at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone to come by though. I was paralyzed in surprise. A few minutes later, the knocking repeated. I looked in the peephole of my door, but I couldn't see anyone there. I thought it must be a prank by children in my neighborhood or something. The knocking stopped just a few moments later, and nothing else happened for 4 more days. It was a Saturday this time. I had invited 2 of my girlfriends to my house, Louise and Satine. That day, my mother was at work. We were watching a movie in my living room. when I went to pick up my charger in my room. My two friends were alone downstairs when they heard those same knocks as the night before. Their first thought was that my mother was coming home early. They didn't know about that previous incident. They opened the door, only to see no one was there once more. The three of us were confused. We didn't know what was going on. Luis reassured us, though, telling us surely we were creating this stress in our heads. Maybe it was just a coincidence with that knocking from last night. The rest of the evening went over quite well, and nobody knocked for the rest of that night. That's what I told myself, at least, until next Wednesday night. I'd just come back home from the grocery store after buying some pasta. After eating, I went back to my room to finish my homework with my headphones in. I was listening to some music. Suddenly, I began to hear banging against the walls. Naturally, at first, I thought this was my rabbit, getting angry and thumping because he was hungry. After a few blows, though, I could hear things moving around on their own. I took courage with both hands and decided to bravely go down to the living room. In the reflection of the mirror in the hallway, I saw the silhouette of a man tapping on my window with a crowbar. I was petrified. The man still hadn't seen me. He then came to knock on the door, the exact same patterns as the other 2 times with his crowbar. Still grasping all my courage best I could, I grabbed a knife. I quietly walked over to the front door. The man was tapping with his crowbar louder and louder. I shouted through the door, telling him to get fucked, and that I was already on the phone with the police. As soon as he heard that, he ran away, and he didn't come back after. As soon as he left, I really did call the police. I was bluffing when he ran away. After hanging up, I cried. I thought that would have been the last moments of my life. He looked like he was about to try and break the window in. 10 minutes later, a patrol arrived, but they couldn't do anything except patrol regularly around my home. The man was never caught or arrested. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't heard the noises that day. This was the moment when I was most scared in my entire life, and it changed everything for me. Let me start by saying this is something I've had to go through, and there are still some things about it I don't really understand. I don't talk about this to anyone in my personal life, really. Not because of how painful it is, mind you, but I just don't like people's reactions to it. No matter how well-intentioned the other person is, it tends to alter relationships permanently. And though over the past 21 years, I've learned to talk about what really happened, I'll tell it from my perspective from back then, the way I remember it. I lived with my mom at the time. My parents had been divorced for 3 years, which for a 7-year-old is pretty much your entire life. My mom back then was someone who took extra care with me. She didn't like it when I played in the yard. She didn't like it when I spent a lot of time at our neighbor's house. Always personally dropped me off at school and was waiting for me at the end of the day to take me home. She taught me to lock all 3 locks on our door and how to see what different cars were parked outside and which ones were familiar. Of course, stranger danger. She was, I now understand, paranoid. There's lots more things, but I'll just skip all that. One night we were sitting on the couch watching TV when a small pickup truck pulled into our driveway. This was really strange. We weren't expecting anyone. Even worse, though, was my mom's reaction. I'd never seen her move so fast. She leapt up from the couch to make sure the door was locked. Then she ran to me, picked me up hard, and carried me to her bedroom and back. She told me to hide underneath the bed. She ran out of the room and closed the door behind her. I heard a man pounding on the front door. Then she started yelling and screaming at him. All of a sudden there was a giant crash. Moments later, the bedroom door flew open and my mom ran inside. There was a big man behind her. I could see the cuffs of his jeans and the toes of his black and brown shoes. My mom was screaming. She tried to turn around and slam the bedroom door shut, but suddenly it pushed open and she was thrown onto the bed right above me. The heels of her bare feet were by my head. hovering just a few inches off the floor, and the man's shoes were in the doorway. There was complete silence for a moment before my mom started to quaver audibly. I heard 2 really loud pops, and nothing moved. The man's feet ran away. I heard his truck start and pull out of the driveway. I waited for my mom to come and get me. Her feet slid down to touch the floor, and the rest of her did too. Her hair was all messy and frizzy. She had her back turned to me, curled with her knees against her chest, and her nightshirt was up in her armpits. I put my hand on her back and was about to ask her if she was okay, when I saw a pool of liquid coming toward me from under her body. I flew away from her, out from under the bed and onto the other side of the room. I was probably screaming at her or something. It seemed like just a few seconds had passed, pressed hard against the wall as I could with my face buried against the baseboard, before I began to hear sirens. It was a big city, so I was used to that noise, but it got louder and louder. Now more feet ran through the front door and into my house. I thought the man had come back. I heard people yelling police, and thought that's what I needed. I needed the police right now. The rest of the night, feet stomping, blankets wrapped around me, I was whisked past my mom so I couldn't see her. I remember really wanting to tell them to help her, but I couldn't find a way to get the words out. It took a long time for me to forgive myself for that. Of course, they were going to help her. They put her into an ambulance while I stood on the front lawn and watched. I followed in a police car behind. Never really got the chance to see her again. They said she died in the ambulance. I saw her at the funeral, of course, but that wasn't really her. The questions answered later don't really help that much, but here they are. My dad had cheated on my mom, and my mom cheated on my dad in revenge. The guy she was with decided to leave his own wife for my mom. My dad left because everything was so messed up. My mom felt really guilty and broke it off with the guy. He was very upset with how she'd ruined his life. She had been worried about him for years after. He found her through a mutual friend, and that was that. The man went back to his apartment after and killed himself too. There was a lot of time with the police. I talked to a lady in a room in front of a camera. My dad came and took me to his house to live with him. It was an extremely confusing time. I realized in that moment there are 2 English languages, one that kids speak and one that adults speak, and only adults are fluent in both. They would have conversations with me in that foreign tongue, going above my head, then switch to child language and say, "Now tell us what you saw. You're going to live with me now," and stuff like that. That's my scary story. My dad really wasn't all that into kids. I just kinda pulled inside myself and worked on school. I went to college, have a good job, have good friends, all of that. But I've learned not to speak about this. The internet is great for anonymously talking about things. But I'm not sure if this really helps anyone. It's just a sad and scary story. I've spent most of my life only talking about this to therapists. And despite what you might think of seeing it on TV, it's actually really helpful. I remember every moment of that night, every breath, every footstep, every loud noise and whimper, and I always will.